Hey, welcome to Live from Dennis's House, part of the Madhouse Magazine Radio Hour, and this is the rise and fall of music, the history of rock and roll. And in part one, we talked about from the beginning of time through the 50s, up through the 60s, Bob Dylan, Beatles, Rolling Stones, heavy metal, all the way up through the 70s, and then we started talking about glam and punk rock, and that's where we left it off. So now this is part two, and we're going to leave off, we're going to start off with the 80s and talk about MTV and the downfall with Napster, and then we'll talk about grunge and a whole bunch of stuff. So stay tuned and enjoy part two of the rise and fall of rock and roll. So let's start off with a little music before we get to the show. How about Life on Mars by David Bowie, and then Perfect Day by Lou Reed, and we'll be right back. Yeah, so then, of course, you had the 80s, and you had new wave. You had hardcore. Punk music turned into new wave music. You put a tie on, and you call it new wave. Then you put a mohawk on, and it's hardcore punk. You have Dead Kennedy's Black Flag, stuff like that. Then, of course, in the 80s, you had hair metal, what I dislike intensely, but everyone else can like whatever they want. It's free country. Poison and Winger. And, of course, MTV came to be in the 80s, yes. Which, would you say that was a downfall or an upswing? I think it was both.
I got to say, I thought it was really an upswing.
Yes.
Positively, it now your imagination. You lost your imagination because now you could see them physically on the screen, and you could see them. For some of them, it was a godsend. Some of them were good looking. Some of them, and some of them had great ideas for ZZ Top.
Exactly.
ZZ Top was kind of one of them known but lower, dealing bands. A B national, and then all of a sudden they were the hippest thing. And there was a lot of musicians that started in the 80s. You had U2 came out, stuff like that.
There was a lot of good stuff in the 80s.
A lot of good stuff still. A lot of rock,
and
mainstream rock.
MTV pushed sales up because people were so excited about this new way to see music.
And it sold a new medium.
Yes,
VHS
exactly.
came in, and that was a new medium, and people were making videos and it actually, and I loved, towards the end there, what MTV did when they had the storytellers, they did the unplugged stuff. That really, there's a lot of behind the scenes, enlightening storytelling. Great stuff.
Great stuff.
MTV
was great.
With the storytellers, though. That's I think the 90s. But yeah, MTV started in what year in the 80s?
I want to say about 82 or 81, maybe.
82 or 84.
All right, here's
I was in high
trivia.
school.
What was the first video played on MTV?
Video Killed the Radio Star.
There you go. By what band? What band?
Ooh.
Two-part question. You weren't expecting that.
Yeah.
It is the Buggles.
The Buggles.
So, yeah, right. There you go. So, and of course, I believe the compact disc also came around in the late 80s, too.
And it came in
early
rectangular
80s,
packaging.
I had mine. I was in high school.
Yeah.
Junior year, 1983.
No, CDs back then?
Yes.
Really?
Yes. They didn't even
Google
have.
that, Mike.
They had less than 100 of
Back
them.
when?
You didn't even have a CD player, right? You just held it up to the sun.
No, we had them. We had them. My first CD was, I got it used from a friend of mine. It was the Police, Zenyatta Mondada.
Ah, nice. See, now I was a holdout, and I was furious. I said, because this is one of my sticking points, because, you lived through all these mediums. The record labels were making all this money all these years. You'd buy a 45, you'd buy a LP, you'd buy the 8-track of the same stuff, you'd buy a cassette. Then they expect you to buy a CD at this point, too. And I was like, I'm not buying any CDs. I'm sticking with vinyl. I refuse, right? But then, of course, by like 90, I caved. And of course, because they started phasing vinyl out and you had to buy CD. And it was convenient, to carry around. But as you can see, I am a proponent of vinyl, and we've gone back to that since. But
CDs started to be produced in 1981.
Oh, nice,
but they became
Luther.
popular in 1982.
Oh, very good, good.
I had my first in 83. But I got to tell you, I saw through it, and I realized we'd go to the swap meet or whatever you want to call the flea market on the weekends, and I was buying up vinyl, 25 cents a piece, to build an ultimate collection.
That's right. You got a collection. How many you got now?
I'm down to 4,500.
What do you mean down?
I
lost some in the flood?
I had over 7,000.
Wow.
I had to make some tough choices. A lot of stuff just was no longer playable.
Oh,
You've listened to, your records how many times, and
Yeah.
you've worn them out, and some of the stuff is not replaceable.
Ah.
A lot of
But
stuff.
still, you can't get rid of it. That's because it's a piece of art. That's what I like about it. A lot of these are unplayable. I don't really even care. I keep it for the artwork, and you'll find out in a moment for the smell, for the feel, for the touch, for the look. Everything about it is awesome. I love everything about it.
I've bought more than a handful of records, and you open them up, and there's roaches. In
Ah, what kind of roaches?
not the kind that you kill with bug spray.
Oh, okay. So then, you had, like you said, MTV, and that was a big jump. But the one thing I heard about that, though, it was kind of a downfall as well, because this is the first time the record labels weren't in charge. That the MTV was kind of in charge at this point. So, but then, the 90s went on. A lot of great music, and I believe this was the last great hurrah, the last great genre of music, if you will, really. That in 90s you had grunge, of course. In the early 90s, Nirvana hit the floor, and they were another phenomenon. And you had all these great bands. The 90s were chock full of bands. Stone Temple Pilots, Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam,
Seattle scene.
Nirvana.
Seattle, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing. See, that's the one thing that we forgot to talk about in length here, but every one of these scenes had a scene to it. It was, came out of a certain city. There was all these bands, all this camaraderie. There was always fashion involved with it. And it was just a whole little, package to it.
I think
And
grunge
then-
music killed hair metal, didn't it?
Yes, it absolutely did. That was the best thing about it. See, you notice we just skipped basically right over hair metal and heavy metal in general. I talked about the beginning of it, but I don't feel that was that important of a part of rock and roll.
Well, you're going from 80s to 90s.
I loved a bit of metal. I loved the Iron Maiden. They were great. You gotta give it up for Metallica.
Oh yeah,
Metallica. Those guys are extremely talented. Their music was listenable. Like you said, heavy metal really started with. They say it started with Led Zeppelin, with the Black Sabbath. I was listening to radio today. Ozzy loved the Beatles.
Exactly.
And how he got from the Beatles to War Pigs, I don't know. But I suspect it was something, that he smoked. And you got to love it, you know?
See, the thing for me, that it doesn't matter what kind of music it is. I love all of this music that we've talked about, even classical music starting back then. All this music, because it's the real deal. It has melody, and these people really mean what they're saying. Chuck Berry meant what he said, started a whole new type of music. People never heard of it. Jimi Hendrix, anybody, Simon and Garfunkel even, great stuff they produced. So I run the gamut. I'm not just saying, all right, I only like this kind of music. I like anything that is real. Exactly. And all of these people that we've mentioned so far were real. And all this music was amazing.
Yep.
So, and then we're on the last steps of this now. We have grunge music, which produced a whole slew of great stuff for the 90s. And then one thing happened in the late 90s that was what people say was the one downfall of music. What would you say? That
Napster.
Napster, of course.
Oh.
So that no more, you didn't have to go to the store and buy anything. You could get this music for free.
But it took so damn long to download, didn't it?
AOL.
Yeah, right. Hear that noise. Can you recreate that modem?
You've got
The
mail.
worst sound ever, yes. But still, you had a method for getting music for free. Now, I wasn't really a big proponent of downloading the music and stealing the music. I was never, I didn't have time for that. And I already had all the music I wanted, basically. And then, so it's just that the record companies were not prepared for this. And what they did is they got greedy. Because I was watching a documentary on, what was the giant record chain?
Tower Records.
Tower Records, yeah.
There's a
That's
documentary
a great
called
documentary.
All Things Must Pass.
Exactly. That's
Russ Solomon, the
Yes.
guy who started Tower Records in the 50s at his father's he had a pharmacy, and they had a jukebox in there, and they had a soda malt shop. And what happened was the guy who was servicing the jukebox would come in and change records, and he said, hey, listen, the records that, get shuffled out or whatever, can you bring them in? And he sold them to him for 3 cents. They sold them for 10 cents. They sold out of them in 2 days, and it was the rest is history. He started a little mini record store, and I think, you know what, when you really watch that, it's what's great about that show, that documentary, is it really, as you track through the years, as it was growing, as Tower Records grew, so did that rock music, so did the equipment, the artists, all the you
concerts, the festivals,
concerts
everything just got bigger and better and better.
The Beatles started with Shay. You couldn't hear them.
Yeah, exactly.
So the people at the concert half the people were there like, oh, I wish I could hear them. Half a dozen people were sitting there saying, this ain't gonna happen again. Next time you're gonna hear them. And sure enough, Jimi Hendrix. When I did meet Noel Redding, and they didn't have mics on. He'd have three stacks, Marshall stacks behind him. There was no microphone. That was the house sound.
Yeah.
So it was ambient sound, and the vocals were the only thing they'd try and mic the drums as best they could, but you never could hear them.
Mm-hmm. And Noel Redding, of course, is the bass player in the Jimi Hendrix Experience, if anyone doesn't know.
Not Noel Redding. He's the drummer.
He's the bass player.
Mitchell was the drummer.
Mitchell was the bass player. I met him through a
No,
guy.
Mitch Mitchell's the drummer. Noel Redding's the bass player.
Yes.
Oh, you're on. Jeez, my bad. So, in any event, I'd met him, and great story about Noel Redding. He later, never really made anything off the estate. Really was kind of penniless from the whole affair, but he came out and did a little tribute thing to Jimmy. Did the Noel Redding Experience, and he played the bass and everything. And what was great is he told me a story. I met him backstage in 1994, and he told me a story. I said, Noel, tell me something that nobody knows about Jimmy. Jimi Hendrix was a terrible car driver. And back then, 1968, 69, these guys were getting paid up to $100,000 a show. And they didn't have bank checks and everything. They would walk out of there with a little, briefcase or suitcase full of money. And he'd say to Michael Jeffries, who was the manager of the band at the time, he'd say, Michael, give me some money. And he'd hand him like $5,000. Jimmy'd go to a car dealership at 11 o'clock in the morning, pick up a car. He loved Corvettes, and this boy could not drive to save his life. He'd take his girlfriend de jour, because anybody in the band or anybody knew Jimmy, if you drove with him once, you would never drive again with this fella. And he'd take the car out, he'd drive around for an hour, he'd crash it, put the pink slip in the glove box, and then he'd leave. So, that was great Jimi Hendrix moments.
Yeah, see, there you go. And that makes me think of something else, is that you said about Noel Redding with no money, that a lot of these guys, these were young kids, and they just wanted to play music, and all of these leeches, these managers and business guys, record company guys, stole all the money from them, that very few people made it out of the 60s and 70s with any money. All the money was gone, and they had to build it all back up again, and you had to feel bad for a lot of these guys, made millions and millions. And these,
I think Al Hendricks didn't get the rights to his son until sometime in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
He's had it now maybe 14, 15 years, but
I can't believe Al Hendricks is still alive and
no,
Jimmy's
he's not.
Oh,
he's
okay.
Not. He's passed away probably almost 10 years or more.
Yeah, because now the whole family's running it, and there's fighting between the family.
Yeah,
right?
I don't
Sisters
know who's
and,
left. I actually don't know
stuff.
the rest, but.
So, all right, so let's get back to Napster here, the downfall of the music business, that the record companies had a chance, and they should have gotten in bed with Napster, if you will, instead of trying to fight them. And what they do instead, that they didn't want to put out CD singles, right, for 99 cents. Instead, they only wanted to produce CDs and charge almost like $20 a CD for it. So that's what was the main downfall right there. That kid said, I'm not paying $20 when I just want this one Tom Petty song. I'm not going to pay $20 when I can get it for free.
Yeah. And CDs were overpriced.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
To produce them now, you know how cheap they are. You can buy them yourself and make them yourself. You can buy 20, 30 of them for $5, $10. CDs, I don't want to cut the artists, but they should have never gone over $10.
Exactly.
And
They
it
wasn't the artists. It was all the greedy record companies that they made their own beds, and now they're lying in it. And it was just a shame. And that I had a thought here. But
and what's a shame is that every time I hear the word Napster, I think of the person Lars Ulrich.
Oh, of course. The most hated guy in the world in the 90s.
Poor Lars.
He did not want Napster he just wanted it to go down completely.
Yeah.
Well, he was right.
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
He
but he was
right.
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 Mhm.
But
You know, Black Crowes, love the Black Crowes, great 90s band. I think it was either Three Snakes and a Charm or Amorica. It's about their fourth record out, and when Napster hit, and before the record could actually get out, they were figuring somewhere in the neighborhood of about 5 million, records or units would be sold. And 2 weeks, 3 weeks after, they couldn't even break, and get gold. I don't know if they probably later got gold for the units, but they couldn't. And they found later on Napster there was over 5 million downloads in the first 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay.
And a little band. Not that those guys were smart, invested their money well, but they lost tens of millions of dollars.
And they're not even the people that really got hurt. The big bands had already made their money and they could still make more money. But the problem was with the little bands just coming up at that time. They were really crushed. And that's what put us into this situation that we're in. And that's what, since the record companies aren't making any money, back in the day when all of this stuff was starting, that record companies and the record business was run by musicians. And then it turned into businessmen and it was just business at this point. And then at this point, when they're not making money, there's no more experimentation. Back in the day, you could have a crappy first album, crappy second album, and they'll just say, all right, try to get a hit. Like I'm thinking of the band Kansas. I heard that documentary that Don Kirshner loved them. And he was like, come on, guys, you're on your fourth album here. I'm losing money. I need a hit. So then they come out with,
Dust in the Wind.
Dust in the Wind, right? And make $10 trillion. But they would have never had that opportunity in, the recent climate, of course. I don't even know what the climate is anymore. There's just, there's like absolutely no, because right now, the man, once again, like I said, after every decade, he crushes the most vital, the people who have something to say. You notice that every artist that has something to say is either killed, put in jail, or put out on drugs. You name it. Anybody, like John Lennon, for example. Richard Nixon went after him, tried to deport him, and eventually somebody killed him. And then you can say, we can have a whole conspiracy theory about this if we want, saying that the man is out to stop music completely, and it was a whole big thing with J. Edgar Hoover and Nixon, and it went to everybody, and they're slowly killing all the artists, and they're only giving us pop once again. Because right now, we're back to where we started with Pat Boone and Fabian. Ooh. We got nobody that has anything to say. Even with the rap music, you had good stuff. Public Enemy, you had NWA.
Yeah.
That was good stuff with somebody to say. Now it's just watered down nonsense, the same old stuff, unintelligible lyrics. It's morons making music, and then you just have girls dancing naked on stage, singing, pop songs, and then you have boy bands. There's no legitimate rock band and people tell me, oh, you got to go find it. No. Good music has always found me. I don't have time to go find music. I didn't have to find the Beatles. I didn't have to find the Sex Pistols. I didn't have to find any of this music. It found me. Amen. And if there's good music out there, it will find me. So I don't know. What's the story, Luther? Is there good music somewhere?
There is. There's a lot of local. There's a lot of local bands on a lower level. The problem is promotions and clubs. As we say, the payola is on a smaller level now. You have these medium-sized clubs or larger bars and venues and locally, and you do not have a responsible group of promoters that are helping these bands. They're just looking to actually tax them, as you would say, in the nicest way. Look, have a day job and do your music. That's always been, some of the most successful people started out that way. But, you have situations where some of these promoters are not developing these acts. And having been in the local scene for 32 years, I worked in the fast lane from probably about 93, 94 to 96, 97. We did a lot of bands. There's a lot of great bands, a lot of talent. Outside of us, there wasn't, they weren't getting recognized. They would literally sell a $20 ticket and I'll give you $2.
Right.
You can't do that. It's a $20 ticket. Give the band $5.
And I have seen some good bands opening up for, national acts, international acts and stuff. I've seen some good bands, but, you don't hear them. You hear them on the radio here or there, but it's not on mainstream radio. It's not, MTV doesn't play music anymore. The satellite radio doesn't really play new stuff. And terrestrial radio is almost out of business.
No access. That's
exactly
what you're getting at. No access.
Right.
So,
you could record your own albums and stuff in your own studio now,
right.
which is
Pro
great.
Tools
Pro
is amazing.
Tools, but you have no way to get it to the people.
No
There's
access.
so much out there, you don't know what to do. So, and then of course you have streaming music now, which is taking over, and you have YouTube. But, the artist doesn't get anything for that, really.
No.
You get the streaming companies make a lot of money, and they give like a penny, a quarter of what the album sales used to give them. So, I've been speaking to artists such as Todd Rundgren, who said, the only way to make money now is to just tour. That it used to be you would tour to support the album.
Yeah.
Now the album is just to support your tour, and you can sell them out, as merchandise. Which merchandise you make a lot of money. You make money with meet and greets and things like that. But it's just
but touring is where the money is.
Exactly.
Now. So you have to physically go out and get it. Whereas it was clear that you could make a great record, and then you had bands that couldn't and wouldn't tour.
Right, Steely Dan, for instance,
Black Friday with Steely Dan, great song. Walter Fagan was it Fagan that was crippled with
Walter Becker, Donald Fagan.
Walter Becker was crippled.
He just passed away,
with stage fright.
Oh yeah, I think they both had stage fright, but I think they got over it because now that they need to make money, they were on tour all the time. Anywhere you turn around, there's Steely Dan, but of course. Walter Becker just passed away. And like I said, it could be part of the conspiracy. The man is slowly killing everyone who has something to say. Prince, David Bowie, name it. Keep naming people just in the past few years. It's just a tragedy.
It all started when Scott Weiland died.
Exactly. All these guys. It's anybody. That whole scene. Every Ramone is dead. Can you believe that? Sid Vicious, they killed.
Well, he killed himself.
Well, you don't know that. It could be part of the conspircy. Let's say
True,
there's a conspiracy.
True.
The man can do whatever he wants to do.
You should have a show on just conspiracy theories.
Well, there you go.
I'm telling you, the reason that space aliens aren't, no one knows about them, they're delicious. They're not going to tell you that. Otherwise, you'd eat them. They'd end up on the menu at Taco Bell. They're delicious.
So, that's where we are. The downfall. The music has crashed. It came from nothing in the 1600s to classical music all the way up to its peak in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and then slowly came down. 90s, it hit the peak again. And now here we are with nothing. We're sitting here with nothing but an old Elvis album.
We're holding on to the past.
That's what you got,
music was real music.
So do you think there's hope? Do you think that somehow that, we'll get down to absolutely no music, no musicians left, and there's going to be a kid somewhere in a cornfield, and he's going to rise above and save music?
Absolutely.
Really?
Absolutely. What's promising, a lot of people in my generation, the Generation X, I believe we are, the children, they're into the Beatles. My business partner, his daughter, she knows so many one-hit wonders, knows all the Beatles and the Doors and the Zeppelin songs. 14-year-old girl, you would not expect to know these things. I know when I was 14, I didn't know what she knows now. A lot of young people are coming in, and surprisingly, they're learning some of the great classic rock, stuff. But
because now it's taught in schools now instead of, my daughter takes a classic rock course in high school.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, that's amazing. I had to listen to Bach and Beethoven, and you're listening to Rolling Stones.
You know what I find really cool is when you play in a show and you look down and the front row, you see like a 12 or 13-year-old girl just taking pictures of you and singing all the words, and it's amazing,
So
at our door show, did you notice the little young fella? He was probably about 8-10 years old.
Oh, in the front row? Yeah, he got the drumstick,
He got the drumstick. Then actually Robbie walked over, handed him a guitar pick, and then as Phil Chen was leaving the stage, Phil Chen handed him a set list.
All right, wow.
Doors fan for life, huh?
But little did you know that Mike jumped him later on in the lobby and took all that stuff away from him.
Oh, Mike.
You should pull it out of your pocket. Here it goes.
Yeah, I brought the set list tonight.
Look, here's the drumstick.
Yeah,
So there we have it. One last thing I want to talk about is the last truly great mainstream album. And for me, this is, you guys are not going to know what I'm going to say, but the last truly great one that you could hear all over the radio and everywhere was 15. Was the name of the album, 15 by Buck Cherry, which featured the hit song Crazy Bitch. And for me, that was the last great rock song, last great rock album, last great rock band. They were cool,
And they play
drugs,
that in
tattoos, everything.
They play that in every strip club.
Exactly, yes. That's what Marilyn Manson, I heard him on an interview the other day. He said, when you're writing a song, what I always do is if the strippers can dance to it, it's going to be a hit. So just don't confuse the strippers and you'll be all right. That's the key to music.
When
really.
you're writing a song, picture strippers.
And just have them in the room with you. How does this one go? And
Can you
if they
shift to
start
this?
dancing, yeah. So that's it. We did the history of music in the fastest time anyone's ever done it. This would normally be a 12 CD disc documentary, and we got through it in 30 some odd minutes or whatever, however long it was. This might be a two-parter because I see we're at an hour now.
Okay.
So we might have to make this a two-parter, Mike.
There's
This
a lot
is
of
exciting. Yeah, it's
lot
good
of
stuff.
good
I'm not
info.
editing anything.
I'm not a crook.
Yeah. So, any last words before we wrap this up? Anything we missed?
If you're not wasted, the day is.
So that's it. That's all I got. Mike,
Yeah.
you got anything else?
Yeah.
What?
No, I do
Oh,
not.
so why'd you say yeah?
Just
then?
saying yeah.
Oh, okay. So we're gonna go out with some more songs. Let's see. What should we play? All right, we're gonna play some punk songs to wrap this up. Now we're gonna go out with Blitzkrieg Bop by the Ramones and Anarchy by the Sex Pistols. And thanks for joining us here live from Dennis's house, part of the Madhouse Magazine Radio Hour. And this interview will not be transcribed, Mike. Sometimes I transcribe it. This I'm not transcribing. So anyway, check us out, Madhouse Magazine, 474 The Mix, and
Chock
that's it.
full of good stuff,
Yes.
Dennis.
See you next time. Thanks for joining us here, Luther B. Hayes and Mike Padron, Light My Fire.
Good night, folks.
See you.